committees to increase voter participation. And all of you are to be commended for your efforts in developing a program that truly is a model for other counties to emulate throughout the state. So now, today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you someone you all know, Assemblymember Marc Berman. Assemblymember Berman serves as chair of the Committee on Elections and Redistricting, where he has become a leading voice in the elections arena. He is one of only 2 members to chair 2 select committees, the Select Committee on the Master Plan for Higher Education in California and the Select Committee on the Census. He also serves on several Assembly standing committees, including governmental organization, insurance, privacy and consumer protection, and transportation. In his first 3 years in the Assembly, he had one of the highest rates of success in the legislature, sending 47 bills to the governor. And as you all know, Assemblymember Berman authored and provided the leadership necessary to successfully pass AB 860, which ensured that every registered voter in the state received a ballot in the mail for the November election. The bill also expanded remote accessible vote by mail to all voters and implemented ballot tracks, a system that permitted voters to track their ballots through the mail. It extended the deadline by which vote by mail ballots could be received until 17 days after election day, which was an important change from previously. And the bill also authorized the processing of vote by mail ballots 29 days before the election, which allowed elections officials more time to process the vote, and it ensured a faster release of votes on election night. So it was a great legislation. We thank Assemblymember Berman for that. And now the Assemblymember has taken on the task of expanding vote by mail on a permanent basis with AB 37. Which he will discuss with us momentarily. We are delighted to have him take time out of his busy schedule to join us today to say a few words. And with that, I give you Assemblymember Berman.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that very kind introduction. And thank you so much for all the work that you and your staff have done in San Mateo County and for the Voter Education Outreach Committee and all of the work that you have done. I learned a lot through the census efforts, actually, about how important it is reaching out to either hard to count communities, if you're talking about the census, or just communities that don't vote in the higher percentages that we want them to, and for various reasons in elections. But having trusted messengers, trusted community leaders on the ground going out into these communities and talking about the importance either of the census or of voting or now of vaccinations is critically important to accomplishing the societal goals that we want. And I think one societal goal that I want is 100% of eligible people voting. And that's something that, the work that all of you have done and continue to do is critical to trying to accomplish that goal. I had the chance to co-chair the Assembly Special Committee on the Secretary of State yesterday, where we discussed the nomination of Dr. Shirley Weber to be the next Secretary of State. And Dr. Weber rightfully said, look, 2020 was amazing. It was prolific. We hit 80% voter turnout. That is fantastic. But the goal should be 100%. And she's absolutely right about that. And we won't get there unless we have the support of groups like yours and Mark, elected officials and your teams. So just really want to thank you first for all the work that you've done. So thank you also for sending us questions ahead of time, which is always appreciated. Although, we'll obviously keep it open for Q&A. But what's the easiest way? I can scroll through some of the kind of the questions that were asked ahead of time. I can just give some background and some high level on things and then let y'all ask questions. What's the best process?
our plan was if you could just do a couple minutes of kind of where we stand, and we'd love to hear a little more about, and Dr. Weber, of course, because that's going to make a big difference in all of this. And then Diane and Pam have actually would like to speak with you, would like to ask the questions directly.
Sure. Perfect. Love it. So yeah, you know, I've had the honor of chairing the elections committee in the Assembly for almost 4 years now. And it was a committee that I wanted to serve on, and I requested to serve on. And then 4 months into my first year in the Assembly, due to a domino effect, all of a sudden I had the opportunity to chair it. And it's a committee that I'm so passionate about because of experiences and things that I've worked on. The first paid job that I had in government was as a summer analyst. It was after my junior year in college, as a summer analyst in the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., which was the office that handled pre-clearance issues under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act for jurisdictions that historically had discriminatory voting practices and fell under Section 5. Unfortunately, that was also the office that was gutted by the Supreme Court decision in 2013, Shelby versus Holder, I believe. And then I went to work on campaigns in South Dakota, in Louisiana, in Kentucky, in between undergrad and law school. While I was in law school, I flew up to Montana for a week in 2006 to do voter protection efforts on a Native American reservation just south of the Canadian border. And then obviously, you know, not long after began running for office. And it's always been a fundamental kind of belief that I have that I don't care who you vote for. I want you to have as easy of an opportunity to vote as possible in a safe and secure and accurate way. And that's just a foundational principle. It should be a foundational principle of this country. Unfortunately, we see in a lot of places that it's not. And that elected officials in charge are constantly trying to find ways to stop people from voting who they don't think will vote for them. And I think that's cowardly, and there's not much that angers me as much as that does. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity to chair the election. It's now just the elections committee. We dropped the redistricting part out of the name because it was confusing people. The Assembly actually doesn't control redistricting anymore. We now have a citizen redistricting committee that does that. So just this year, which Mark, your intro reminded me we need to change my bio on my website because it's just the elections committee now. And I've been able to do a lot that at the time we didn't think would be a big deal. And then, you know, a couple of years later, we realized it really was. One of those things was the ballot tracking system, the Where's My Ballot system, which was a bill that I introduced in 2018, following on, I believe it was Colorado, who was one of the leaders in that. And we don't have to come up with all the good ideas ourselves. There are 49 other states that have a lot of good practices. And to see that be adopted by 5 million Californians so far, and hopefully millions more to come, and increase transparency in our voting process, which is the whole purpose of that system, is so important now more than ever, as unfortunately, you know, leaders across the country try to undermine people's faith in our voting system, in our election system. And so I think things that we can do to increase transparency will increase voters' trust in the process, which is as important now as it's ever been. I had a bill, I think it was also 2018, to create the Office of Elections Cybersecurity in the Secretary of State's office. So California became the first state in the country to have its own state Office of Elections Cybersecurity, which was the result of a special committee that I held with cybersecurity leaders from across the state to discuss what California could do to better prepare for the 2018 election and then 2020 election after the 2016 election. I've had bills on deepfakes, and we expanded that bill to manipulated content, not just deepfakes, to try to stop people from recording fake videos that could confuse voters, because I think voters should have the right to know whether or not what they're seeing and what people are pushing at them, whether it's on TV or on Facebook or wherever, they should know whether or not that content is real. And so that was cutting edge. That was very controversial because it runs into First Amendment kind of freedom of speech issues, but it was very important. And then last year, 2 days after, I think we introduced it 2 days after, I think we did, the Wisconsin primary in I think it was March or April of last year. I introduced the bill, or I amended a bill I already had, AB 860, to require that Californians mail a ballot to every active registered voter in California. And that was after I saw, and some of you might remember, I think it was April, the Wisconsin primary, where Wisconsinites, in the middle of a pandemic where there was still a lot of confusion and fear, there's still a lot of confusion and fear, Wisconsinites were forced to show up in person and stand in line for hours to be able to vote. I heard and read news stories of Wisconsinites who voted by mail. An appellate court had said you have to do X to vote by mail, and so a voter voted under that procedure. But then the Supreme Court changed that rule 2 days later. But the voter had already mailed off their ballot, so they had no idea whether or not their ballot would actually be counted because the rules changed after they voted. And so I connected with Ethan Jones, the consultant for my elections committee, who's on the call today, and my chief of staff, and said we need to introduce a bill ASAP to require that we mail a ballot to every voter in California. So that, because we have no idea what the system is going to be like in November or late October, what the COVID situation is going to be like. But let's just take all of the uncertainty out of it and mail everybody a ballot. And let's push back the deadline for receipt by our elections officials like Mark Church, because we have no idea if COVID is going to totally interrupt our mail system. And we don't know whether or not the mail flow is going to be operating under kind of a normal time frame. And so let's just give people the maximum ability where if you vote by election day and you fill out your ballot properly, let's give you the ability to have that vote counted. That should be like the underlying ethos of our laws. And so I was really proud at the bipartisan support that bill ended up receiving. I worked closely, listened closely with my colleagues from across the aisle, many of whom represent different parts of California that have different kind of situations than San Mateo County, and different concerns and legitimate concerns. And so we tried to listen and work out all the concerns that they had, and was really happy with that end result, and was really happy that we were able to mail a ballot. Up until then, there were about 80% of California voters automatically received a vote by mail, whether or not either they lived in a county that was a voter's choice Act county, or they just requested a ballot. But that left 4 to 5 million Californians that would not have received that ballot in the mail. So was really proud of that effort. So I'll stop rambling because I could talk forever, and I know there's some good questions to get to.
Great. The first question is going to be from Diane Leeds, who co-chairs.
Hi. Good morning, Assemblymember Berman. Yeah, so obviously, as we heard from both yourself and Mr. Church, that we saw the greatest turnout in terms of voters in November for the last several decades, as well as we saw the largest percentage of eligible voters voting, but still it's only at 70% statewide. So I'm sure, a lot of the reasons for the increased participation, one was obviously a lot of interest in the election, and then with bills such as AB 860, which made it a lot easier for people to vote safely in the pandemic. So what we've seen now is that there are currently 2 bills in the legislature, your bill, AB 37 in the Assembly, and then a similar bill, SB 29 in the Senate. The main difference, as far as we can tell, is SB 29 has an end date of 2021. So it looks like it's just trying to put things in place just for this coming year. So the questions are, one, is there a strategy behind having 2 separate measures going through the legislature? And then related to that is, why not just amend, the existing AB 860, or amending the Voters' Choice Act to maybe reduce some of the requirements so that it's more palatable to more counties?
Great questions. And there is a strategy to having the two different bills. So the Senate bill, Senate Bill 29, it is moving through the legislature with what we call an urgency clause. And what that means is that as soon as the bill is passed and signed by the governor, it goes into effect immediately and would apply to special elections that are going to happen in 2021. And so that means a couple of things. When a bill has an urgency clause, it increases the threshold for passage to 2/3. So it's a more difficult level to get it through the legislature. And then, but the bill goes into effect immediately. Usually, a normal bill like my bill, AB 37, will have a 50% plus one, a simple majority passage, but it won't go into effect until January 1st of 2022. Normal bills go into effect January 1st of the year after they were passed and signed into law by the governor. But we have some special elections this year. We'll have a special election in LA to replace Senator Holly Mitchell's seat. She was elected to the LA County Board of Supervisors. We have a special election now in San Diego. Assuming that the Assembly votes to pass out Dr. Weber today and the Senate does likewise, which I feel confident in. And there'll be a special election in San Diego. LA falls under the Voters' Choice Act in a kind of hybrid, kind of funky LA way. And so that's not as big of a concern. San Diego does not. Their county board of supervisors had not adopted the Voters' Choice Act yet. They have a new majority on that board, and I think they might soon. So we want to pass a bill as soon as possible to make sure that some of these improvements, mailing a ballot, extending the deadline, the Track My Ballot service get used for those special elections. Heck, we might have a recall, a gubernatorial recall at the end of the year. I don't know. So we want to make sure that those processes are in place immediately. And because of that, SB 29 is like copying a lot from AB 860. AB 37, we want to copy a lot from, or we want to make permanent a lot of the improvements from AB 860, but we also want to have a conversation over the course of this year, looking back at what happened in November 2020 and decide, what worked, what didn't, what should we change more? Should we have a conversation like you alluded to about maybe, making Voters' Choice Act statewide, which I brought up in the hearing with Dr. Weber yesterday. We want to have a more thoughtful, thorough, deliberate conversation with stakeholders about that before we make that permanent into the future. And then there's like all things, we like to share. So I kind of came out quickly and I said, hey, y'all, I'm making my, a lot of AB 860 permanent. My dear friend, Senator Umberg in the Senate said, hey, man, what about me? And so he gets SB 29, which focuses on this year. And then I get AB 37, which focuses on the permanent stuff. And then everybody, both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, get a big bill. And we have that kind of sharing between the houses, which is important for everyone to get along. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Pam?
Yes. Good morning, Assemblymember Berman. And first of all, I want to say thank you for moving to Menlo Park. Of all the cities you could have chose, you came to my city. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're very happy to be there. I was walking up and down our street talking to my staff when we came up with AB 860. So, the vision is strong in my head. Okay,
very good. And I also want to thank you for all the work that you have been doing to ensure fair elections and that all citizens can vote. There were some things that we did in San Mateo County that were very successful, and there are a couple of things. One is there were the provisions of the VCA that really targeted voting for the underrepresented communities, and that includes language access, voter education, disability access, location of drop boxes, etc. How can we be ensured that that is a part of whatever comes forth with AB 37? Additionally, there were two other pieces. The one with the mail-in ballots. to allow 17 days was absolutely wonderful, but we probably don't need that much time. So the thoughts of going forward on the future, what are you thinking about the amount of time afterwards beyond 3 days, since that is an issue of ballots not being counted? And sorry to do this, but the third thing is when it comes to signatures, which seems to be the biggest challenge with having ballots rejected, is there any thought of doing a statewide curing process, ballot curing process, similar to what we do in San Mateo County?
Yeah, great questions. So starting at the top, yes, we absolutely want to make sure, and that's kind of why we're going to take a little, that's why AB 29 or SB 29 is moving super fast. AB 37 is moving more deliberately, is because we want to hear from counties and we want to hear from organizations like VIOC. Is it VIOC? Did I get that right? Yeah, about what worked and about what you saw on the ground and about what worked and what didn't work, and implement some of those improvements or codify some of those improvements into law in AB 37. And so that's going to be a huge priority, is making sure that we focus on underrepresented communities that don't have the high voting rates that other communities might have. And what can we do? What can we do to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for people to be able to vote safely? So whether it's voter education efforts, whether it's more drop boxes, whether it's having more 24-hour drop boxes, whether it's the different locations, we are going to have to clean up our laws. And I know a colleague is going to have a bill on it. I don't remember which colleague yet, because I don't know if y'all remember, but it turned out some Republican elected officials in Southern California got some duct tape in a paper box and put it outside and wrote official on it, and tried to collect ballots. And that's not right. So we're going to have lots of conversations about all of these things based on what happened in 2020 and what we learned. And so please, let me know, let my staff know about what you saw, and what you think might make sense to scale statewide. And we're going to be looking at all of that very closely over the next couple of months. So that's going to be a huge part of the AB 37 effort. Your second question had to do with the duration of time, and I totally agree, Pam. 17 days we I think first had it at like 20 days, which we thought was the maximum time. And then the elections officials came back and said, that complicates things for a variety of reasons. Can you give us a little more? And actually, this is perfect because it's going to tie together. This complicates things for a variety of reasons. Can you give us a little buffer? And so we said yes. And so we changed it to 17. I think in reality, in a non-COVID world, 5 to 7 might be the sweet spot. 7 to 9 might be the sweet spot. I don't want to commit to anything yet, but I imagine that we're going to change it to something in that time frame, because we also want to let our county elections officials kind of have a stop date that lets them move on with certifying the election and have it be a little more timely and a little less under the gun for the 28-day certification or 30-day certification that we have in law. Speaking of that, there is actually a statewide standard for ballot curing. It was a bill in 2018, I believe. I've got some notes here, so let me just scroll ahead to make sure that I don't get this stuff wrong. And that's why I asked Ethan to be on the call to stop me from lying to y'all about details. In 2018, the legislature passed and Governor Brown signed a measure to ensure that a vote, and I was bummed because I wanted this bill, and I think a senator got it before I did, because it's a great bill and an important issue. In 2018, the legislature passed and Governor Brown signed a measure to ensure that a voter is notified that the signature did not match and may return a completed signature verification statement in order to have his or her ballot counted. The legislature revisited this issue in 2019 and streamlined the process for a voter to verify the ballot that the person cast. These ballots created minimum statewide standards that counties must follow for ballot curing, but some counties took additional steps beyond those required by state law including providing multiple notifications to voters with missing or non-matching signatures, and saw even greater success in reducing the number of ballots that were rejected. Now you can tell when I'm reading what my staff wrote and what I'm just saying extemporaneously, but that was all gratefully provided by my staff. But and the ballot tracking system can help with that, because if somebody, you know, is watching their ballot go through the mail and then they get a notification, they get an email or they get a text saying, hey, your ballot was not processed, your ballot was not counted because of a problem, that gives the voter an additional notification that there was some problem with the way that they submitted their ballot. So we'll have to look at a lot more of the specifics. You know, now we know that I think it was 0.6% of ballots, vote by mail ballots, that were discarded this election cycle because of various issues. But let's dive even deeper. And I know we have that data that I don't have off the top of my head, to find out specifically what those problems were, and then what can we do to try to alleviate those problems and make it that we get closer to 100% of ballots get counted.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Diane, do you want to have a closing statement here? Or shall I?
Go, you keep on going.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Assemblymember Berman, we wouldn't be doing due diligence for all of the activist organizations that have been working on voter education and voter engagement. And we really want to be able to have input on this bill, because our experience in the communities you're talking about, and I can speak for San Mateo County, the southern end where we are, and the work that was done here. So we want to make sure that we are deeply involved with what you're doing going forward, because we have, I believe, an excellent model that's been successful. And I think when we see Mindy Romero's report, Dr. Mindy Romero's report, you know, it'll verify what we know. So anyhow, that essentially is it. We want to make sure that we have a seat at the table and can help, you know, guide this process. So again, thank you very much. And I think we're going to have questions from the audience. So I turn it over to Petra.
Well, so just to finish off what Pam was saying, so what is the best method for us to provide input in terms of what we've experienced here in San Mateo County?
Yeah, I'd say the good news is that, I mean, San Mateo County is in a better position than any other county. I feel like I really got to work on this whole Zoom thing. I feel like half of my face is light and half it's like the Phantom of the Opera or something going on. I mean, San Mateo County is in a very lucky place in the sense that you're represented by two members that serve on the elections committee, one that chairs the elections committee, and both that are very, very passionate about elections issues, with myself and Kevin Mullen. And so, you know, never hesitate to reach out to us and make sure that we're aware of what you're seeing, of what you've experienced, you know, of what you think we should do to change these bills to make them better. So that's on an informal basis. On a more formal basis, there are a lot of statewide organizations that are very, 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 very involved in everything that we do. And so some of those organizations are the League of Women Voters, California Common Cause, the ACLU, although sometimes the ACLU hates my bills, but that's okay. And you know, lots of other organizations that have a lobbying presence, that have hired staff in Sacramento, and that are on some statewide committees. Last year, for example, the Secretary of State set up a statewide committee that a lot of organizations were involved with, that really helped inform some of the details of AB 860. I mean, we came up with the idea, and then we fleshed out a lot of those details with that standing committee that included elections officials as well. And members from the Secretary of State's office and the Assembly and the Senate. So, you know, either just reach out to me and my staff when you have ideas or see things that you think should be changed or improved, or start engaging with some of those statewide organizations as well, who are up here all the time.
Okay, great, thank you. So back to you, Petra.
Thank you, Assemblymember Berman. I wanted to give the opportunity for everyone in the room to ask you questions. So if anybody has a question, either raise your hand. Actually, I see a question from Sarah Matlin. Sarah Matlin, do you want to just take yourself off mute from Boulder Advocacy?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So thank you so much for your information about SB 29 and AB 37. What is the timing on those so that organizations both in San Mateo County and statewide know when is the deadline for weighing in with their representatives and senators?
Yeah, so for AB 37, that's going to be moving through the normal process. And so we'll first hear that bill in my committee, in the Assembly Elections Committee, sometime in I think late March or early April. And I appreciate you asking the other question so I can justify asking Ethan to be on this call. Ethan, could you weigh in on the timing of SB 29? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, SB 29 is moving very quickly through the process. My understanding is it's probably going to be voted on the Senate floor tomorrow, and then it'll come over to the Assembly, at which point, because of the urgency and the fact that there are special elections coming up where this will need to be enacted quickly, I imagine that we will be moving on it very quickly in the Assembly, though I don't have exact dates at this point. But you know, days and weeks rather than months on that one before we try to get it all the way through the rest of the process.
Thanks, Ethan.
We have a question from Elsa Schaefer.
Oh, sorry, Mark, this is just a tiny one, but when you mentioned 6% of ballots were not able to be counted, and it sounded as though, I just, if you could correct me about this.
Point six.
Oh, thank you. Oh, big relief. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you so
big
much.
difference.
So
Yeah.
that was post ballot curing then.
Correct.
And do you or Ethan have any idea how many ballots needed and were able to get cured?
I don't. Ethan, do you happen to know off the top of your head?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I believe that's information that the Secretary of State's office has, so we can probably find that out.
Well, mostly, I'm so happy about 0.6.
It's a big difference.
Yes, thank you.
And just as far as San Mateo County, I know that the elections office has a lot of information they're going to share with us right after this at 10, and Dr. Minnie Romero's report on San Mateo County hopefully will be ready for our next VIOC meeting. We'll be able to really dive into San Mateo's numbers. Another question from Adria Orr from Asian Americans Advancing Justice.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. Thank you so much for joining us today, Assemblymember Berman, and thanks for all your leadership. It's been quite a year for voting, and I know we really appreciated all your work. I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper, kind of on a piece of, I think it's kind of related to one of the questions that Pam posed earlier about, you know, some of the sort of outreach provisions targeting communities that do have a little bit harder time voting that we see under the VCA, but not sort of in the counties not using the VCA. And, you know, our organization in particular thinks a lot about voters who have language needs, who are limited English proficient and need language access support. And, you know, just kind of noting that in VCA counties who have expanded, you know, mail-in voting, there are sort of these provisions around, you know, outreach requirements in language notifications, language request postcards that, you know, are kind of required in those counties, but aren't required in the non-VCA counties. So I was wondering if, you know, you and your staff had thought a little bit about how the state might ensure that people who need language assistance are equally served by mail-in voting in counties that don't have, you know, some of those VCA requirements that are built in.
It's a great question, and kind of the reason why we're taking a little more deliberate approach with AB 37 is so we can have those conversations and we can figure out. There's always, as I'm sure you know, tension between us mandating that counties do things versus us suggesting and you know, not necessarily mandating that counties do things, and so that's all going to be a part of this conversation over the coming 6 months, 8 months. before the end of the legislative session about looking at, should we move to just a straight VCA model statewide, or are there things that we can pick and choose out of VCA to require statewide? What additional resources can the state provide to the counties to help them with those costs? I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons why we were so successful in 2020 was the state spent a lot more money as well, and gave counties a lot more resources to be able to implement these changes, to deploy best practices. So a huge language access is a huge focus. No, I don't have, I don't have any kind of concrete things yet, other than we're going to be having that conversation, and I hope you let us know what you think and how we can do things better in the non-VCA counties, assuming we don't just expand VCA statewide.
Awesome. Thank you, Assemblymember Berman.
Can you take another couple questions?
Sure, I gotta hop on. I've got a 9:50 hard stop, but I'll go up until then.
Okay, Tim, do you want to take yourself off of mute, Tim Clark, and ask your question?
Sure. Assemblymember Berman. President Trump campaigned very actively against all mail-in ballots, which is pretty diametrically opposed to your position. What are the best arguments for countering future efforts to do the same thing?
It's a great question. There are no recorded evidence of significant voter fraud with mail-in ballots, period. And President Trump himself and most of his family vote by mail. And so I guess the question is, if it's good enough for them, and it's good enough for a lot of our elected officials in Congress, and there's no actual evidence of fraud, and it's a safe way for people to vote. And now with ballot tracking, there's maximum transparency around it. I don't see any arguments not to do it. Thanks, Tim.
Judah, do you want to ask your follow-up question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if California had any challenges with ballot processing due to dismantling U.S. Postal Service equipment that the Trump administration did.
So that was, yeah, it was ironic because when we introduced the bill, we extended that deadline because we were worried that COVID would disrupt the Postal Service. Then a couple of months later, we realized it was the president who was going to disrupt the Postal Service, which wasn't what we anticipated, but we were glad that we had the extension in there. I think, as far as I know, and I might even defer to Mark Church, as far as I know, because we had that extended period to 17 days, I'm not aware of any problems. But Mark, are you aware of San Mateo County getting many ballots even after that 17 days that were postmarked by November 3rd?
We received, of course, in the first 3 days, the most ballots, but we did receive ballots all the way up to about the 12th, 13th day. I don't think we received anything after that, but we were in constant communication with the postal authorities, and there was no disruption of service in our area, and I hadn't heard of any disruption throughout the state of California. The Postal Service has been a great partner with San Mateo County and with other counties throughout the state, and they did an excellent job, and we worked together. It's a team effort, and so no disruption of service that we are aware of.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Thank you, Assemblymember Berman. I know you have a hard stop in like 1 minute, so I want to have the opportunity myself also to thank you on behalf of Thrive, San Francisco Peninsula People Power, the VIOC, Menlo Together, this whole amazing group of people who are really interested in, making elections, like you said, 100% participation. Like, we are all on board for that. So please reach out to us anytime if there's anything we can do, and we'll try to keep the communications lines open so that, our experiences with reaching out to those communities can help inform what you're working on.
Perfect.
So,
I appreciate all that and all the work. That was my Sacramento roommate, Jesse Gabriel. We have a Northern California, Southern California thing going on here at the house. But thank you all so much for the work that you're doing to increase voter access and voter participation all throughout San Mateo County. And please let us know about what worked really well and how we can keep doing things better.
Yes, we thank you again.
Thanks, y'all.
Everybody, please stay on because we have much more to talk about and even a couple of follow-ups on what Assemblymember Berman said. So I'd love to, we had a couple more questions, a couple more conversations that I just want to keep going with. First of all, I'd love it if Sarah O'Brien could unmute herself and tell us about what the elections office does when they get a ballot that's not correct, because you put it in chat, but I actually want you to tell everyone.
All right, and let's see, what did I put in the chat there? Oh, about how we've been sending letters to voters, as I say, prior probably 2015, and that was long before it was required. I mean, we send the letter to the voter. If they need to sign something, we include a prepaid envelope with our address on it. We try to make it as easy as possible. Some people will still come bring whatever form if they needed to sign something into our office on the last day, you know, like 28 days after the election, they come in person, they want to make sure their vote counts, but somehow they didn't deal with it earlier. But we have a letter saying, hey, your signature doesn't match. It may be because of the DMV signature versus the signature you gave us on the your envelope. We have the household difference, which hasn't happened as much, where a husband signs the envelope, the wife put the ballot in, and vice versa, but we don't necessarily get both envelopes at the same time. So we can't count one envelope until the other one arrives. And if it doesn't arrive, we send out a letter saying, we need to work out something here and get your signature. Let's see. And just basically it was no signature. That's one of the, probably the second biggest reason, but still it's really improved. And this year I heard Alex Padilla speak on KQED earlier this week, even though he's got another job. Maybe they recorded it earlier, but he said, statewide, that it was really reduced, the signature verification issues, thanks to lots of education by groups like ours.
In San Mateo County, just during the last election, we had approximately 14,000 ballots that were curable challenges. And of those 14,000 ballots, keep in mind we had 380,000 ballots that were 380,193 that were cast in this election. Of that number, 14,000 were challenged, but they were curable. In other words, there was an opportunity for those to be cured. Of those 14,000, we had 12,800, almost 12,900 that were cured. So in the final analysis, out of 380,000 ballots that were sent, we had 1,151 ballots that were rejected in this election.
Thank you, Jim. David, did you want to ask the question about ballot tracking?
Yes, thanks, Petra. The assembly member mentioned about AB 37 and ballot tracking being more codified statewide. I kind of missed, what were the issues, if any, in the last election around ballot tracking, and what improvements are we looking for or hoping for moving forward?
Jim, are you able to?
Assembly members, staff members still on the call, or?
Ethan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was typing up an email, so I missed the question. So my apologies.
Oh, sorry, Jim. So the assembly member mentioned something about ballot tracking and how successful it was in the last election. It sounds like there were some issues or glitches in the process. What's the thought about improving on ballot tracking from the last election moving forward? And is it in AB 37 or otherwise?
Yeah, so the one of the big challenges in what was otherwise enormously successful, I think the last data I saw was that over 5.5 million Californians signed up to track their ballots through the system. But there were some challenges, as is the case with any significant new program when you first roll it out. And one of the big ones was just the messages that actually went out to voters. And the Secretary of State's office has already said that they want to work with county elections officials to refine the content of those messages. So, for instance, one of the things that I heard from a lot of elections officials that they got calls from voters who maybe didn't understand the message that they were receiving was the last step in the process in most counties when a ballot was received and the county did the signature verification on it and determined that the signature matched. The last message that most voters got then at that point was, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was something like your ballot has been accepted and will be counted. And a lot of voters then wanted to know, okay, well, why didn't I ever get a text message telling me that my ballot was counted? And that's because once the signature verification has happened, the ballot return envelope has been opened and the ballot separated from that, there's then no way for the elections official to tie that ballot back to the voter. And that's deliberate because we want to protect the secrecy of the ballot. So that's one thing in particular that I know the Secretary of State's office even made some changes on the fly during the last election cycle in the language that was used in response to concerns that they were getting from county elections officials. And there are, I think, further ways in which that language, the Secretary of State's office is looking at refining that language. So those are some improvements that, you know, may be able to be done even without the need for legislation, but just through internal processes and the Secretary of State engaging with county elections officials. There's one other thing that depending on what county you were in and the type of system that they were using, voters in some counties got much more detailed information about the status of their ballot as it moved through the mail stream than voters in other counties did. And that's something that my understanding is the systems that counties use, what's called their election management system, which is sort of what feeds information into the ballot tracking system that is used to generate those text messages to voters. That between the election management system and some of the vendors that the counties use to mail out ballots and the information that they're able to get as ballots are moving through the system, that there were some changes that couldn't be made in time necessarily for last November's election, but in the long term, more and more counties are going to be able to provide more detailed information to their voters in the ballot tracking system.
Thank you, Ethan. Sorry for catching you off guard, but we appreciate the detailed answer. And Sarah Ryan is going to take herself off mute and actually answer that as well.
And I'm sorry, I was busy typing away about our tracking system, but I guess that basically answers it, is that you know, individuals have been able to go to our website. It's had a few different names over time, but if they wanted to track their ballot in San Mateo County, they didn't have to wait until this tracking system came out from the Secretary of State. And people still used our system in the last election because they may not want to give their phone number or their mobile phone to get that alert from the state. Not that I believe it was said on the website that it wasn't going to be used for other purposes, but we all know how that is. We want to keep some of our information confidential, so.
I think I just want one more thing. I mean, the only thing that I heard in terms of feedback about the ballot track system was I think people weren't aware of, again, if they deposited their ballot in a drop box, I don't think people were aware that the drop boxes weren't necessarily emptied every day. So especially at the beginning of the process, some people were feeling that they were waiting a really long time to get notified. So again, it might just be more of, making it more clear to people as to what the process is and when to expect to get notified. But that was something I heard from a number of people.
Great. Does anybody else have questions while we still have Ethan on the call for us before we get to kind of dig deeper into San Mateo County? So I want to reiterate just about the VOC that, again, we've been doing this since end of 2017. Specifically, lots of people on this call have actually been working on voter outreach in many different ways since way before then as well. Even though this is not an election year, there are important things happening with civic participation. So I want to make sure everyone continues to be engaged. So February 24th, we're going to be having the 101 about the redistricting from the Asian Americans Advancing Justice are going to be hosting that. And everybody who is in this room is probably interested in it, even if they don't know it, because this is kind of the basis of how elections work, is how the maps are drawn. And because we will be getting out the new census numbers, maps are all going to be redrawn. School districts, county districts, city districts, there's going to be a lot of work for the elections office, I assume, when those maps are all done. This is over the course of this year, this is all going to happen. The reason we're doing this in February is so that people can get educated and know what they need to do, so that when the numbers come out for the redistricting, we'll be all ready.
We are already starting.
Excellent. Actually, Jim, do you want to kind of tell us what that process is just quickly, so that we know your timeline for that and how that fits in with our timeline?
Well, we're in the preparation phase right now. The process is all data driven. There are numerous databases that have to come together to draw the district boundaries, to actually draw the precinct lines, and to put all those together. And we're very fortunate here that we just established a new GIS system. Thanks to the assessor's office, we established a new assessor's parcel layer. And that enables us now to synchronize all of the addresses and all of the information that's critical to putting into those new maps. In addition, we have our precinct layer and our TRA layer. Our TRA layer is our tax rate area layer, which really is established by BOE, which are the taxing boundaries of jurisdictions, which really technically and legally define the boundaries of a jurisdiction. So we have to then meld all of that information to create the new precincts that are going to fall within those districts. And it is, again, a very technical and complex process. Those of you who would like to see, how that's done, open and transparent elections is key to our operation here. We can feel free and peek over the shoulder sometime of some of our technicians that are doing that. But right now we are in the process of putting all of those databases together, the systems together, and we're training our staff. We are building a GIS system that's going to be able to do that a lot easier than we have in the past, but still it is a monumental task. So we're starting that right now, and we're thinking of bringing in a new consultant to help us merge those databases, and that's Esri, which is a leader in the industry in the United States with respect to geographical information systems and those types of databases. So a lot's going on in the background right now in preparing for that.
And Jim, when would be kind of the time when the public would comment on proposed redistricting?
Well, the redistricting process is different. We basically are at the recipient end of it, and I don't have the answer to that particular question that you just raised, but all I know is we get the final decision and then our work starts. So, but I can't tell you when that's going to happen.
That's what I thought. I wanted to confirm. So if you're interested in before it gets to the elections office, that's when you come to the February 24th event.
There you
to
go.
learn what we can do to try to influence those maps, to make sure that neighborhoods are kept together when they should be, and that there's no weird looking things because somebody's trying to make sure that their district will re-elect them. But in California, we don't have, it's very different than in a lot of states because we have a citizens redistricting committee. And I'm going to stop there because I want you to be excited about the February 24th event. So, but the next VOC is actually on, as Sarah pointed out, St. Patrick's Day on March 17th. And we're all crossing our fingers that Mindy Romero will be ready with the report so we can kind of really do a deep dive into the November elections results. And if not, we will come up with a new topic, but we're hoping for that. So does anybody have anything they want to bring up in general before we hand it over to Jim to give some the elections office numbers from the November election? Does anybody have any comments on Marc Berman's and kind of next steps that you think the VOC should take regarding?
First of all, I think Mark made, and this is Jim, made an absolutely excellent presentation, and we have just a fantastic representative in that area, very knowledgeable, and the staff is too. So we are fortunate. I think the most important thing in elections is something that Secretary Padilla said a couple of years ago, and that is that in the United States and in California, throughout California, San Mateo County is somewhat very fortunate, but elections have been neglected from the budgetary point of view, in terms of facilities, in terms of people, in terms of technology, and in terms of operations. You don't have to go back too far, even in this year, to see that there's a lot of counties in the state that have had challenges fiscally to manage such a large operation. So if there's anything that the VOC or citizens can do, is to make sure that your elected officials know the importance of properly funding elections operations. Because again, to quote Secretary Padilla at the time, elections has really been neglected over the years. And there's a lot of deferred maintenance that has to be put into place, both for facilities, for technology, and for people. Because people, are essential to the whole process. And we have a brand new, really, paradigm that we're working in, that the people that come into elections, particularly the elections professionals, have to be highly skilled technical professionals, and they don't come cheap. So again, resources are critical to the successful conduct of elections, and we can't forget that theme that Secretary Padilla left us with.
David, did you have a current question, or did your hand raised from before?
Sorry, it's from before.
Okay.
I'll unraise it.
Thanks. Okay, it sounds like now is a great time for Jim. Do you want to share your screen and show us your, oh, Michael.
Now, many of you did get to see a couple of days after the election this presentation. Was for the benefit of those that weren't there at that meeting. We'll go through it relatively briefly. We did update some of the figures, and again, we'll open it up to question and answers with respect to the November election. First of all, just as a background, and all of you do know that, this was an extraordinary election. Not only was it the largest election ever held in San Mateo County with respect to the number of registered voters and participation, but it was held in a COVID-19 environment, in the middle of a pandemic. It couldn't have been more challenging for election officials for this election and in this environment. But thanks to the efforts of the VOC, thanks to the efforts of our staff, thanks to the leadership of Mr. Church, and the funding that we did receive, we were able to, I think, conduct this election in an exemplary manner, given the challenges that were before us. It's just a general overview on it. We had 442,000 registered voters. There was 245 candidates in this election, 168 seats up for election. a real staggering number, gets back to the data, 133 different ballot styles. Keep in mind that this election had the convergence of SB 415 and 450 also, but 415 is when jurisdictions basically moved their local governing board elections to even numbered years. And so, we have 70 jurisdictions in San Mateo County. In the past, we had them split between even and odd numbered years. We are now seeing all of those jurisdictions move to even numbered year elections. And not all of them were there in this election, but a large percentage of them. And therein lies the reason for the large number of ballot styles. Total of almost 400 different ballot styles in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And talk about the technical aspects of an election. That's where everything that we just talked about before in terms of precincting and redistricting, it all ultimately is reflected in that one ballot style. It's a fascinating subject. We can spend a whole hour on how that works, and really the super job that our GIS people do to put all that together. There were 60 jurisdictions on the ballot, 65 contents, 11 measures, and 12 state propositions. Michael, yeah, there you go. Our infrastructure is, again, a Voters Choice Act infrastructure, vote by mail, RAVBM, remote accessible vote by mail. That was unique in this election in that while we were the first county in the state of California to develop a remote accessible vote by mail program, and it was geared to assist folks with visual impairment. So it was an ability for visually impaired voters to be able to vote from the ease and convenience of their home by receiving a ballot on their computer, being able to mark it and then mail it back in. Well, that program, thanks to AB 860, was expanded to every voter in San Mateo County, and it was heavily utilized. Not heavily utilized, but it was utilized in this election. I'll have the numbers a little bit later there. We had 39 drop box locations, which were heavily utilized, 45 vote centers. Even though, we're talking about voting by mail, I cannot emphasize the importance of vote centers. Vote centers are the service centers that help voters throughout an election answer questions, replace ballots, vote in person. They are essential to the vote by mail infrastructure, and they were highly utilized in this election, even in the pandemic. We had close to 33,000 people visit our vote centers. We had 3 pop-up vote centers, 3 ballot pickup service locations, which was a new service that we provided, and also curbside ballot drop-off at all vote centers, which the folks in this COVID-19 environment took advantage of and utilized heavily. Michael, next page, there you go. In terms of our infrastructure, we had 378 ballot marking tablets, printers, key to the whole process to be able to, the 121 mobile ballot printers have the facility and the capability in a VCA environment, which is different than a polling place environment, to print the ballot at any one of those 133 different ballot styles, really 400. The mobile ballot printers allows a vote center in Daly City to print the ballot for a Redwood City voter that may visit that center and want to vote there. 10X poll books, I'm telling you that the e-poll books that we used in the last 2 elections literally has transformed elections into the digital age. It has facilitated our ability to monitor and monitor the activities at the vote centers, but provide real-time data to voters as to what vote centers are highly utilized, where there is a line, where there isn't a line, and we can literally speed the process up immensely because of the 10X e-poll books, and the dashboards that they provide for elections management is absolutely incredible. And we had cradle points that were put in place. Those are the secured connections between our vote centers and our voter information database. We had, a new thing. Yeah, I'm glad that you put that in there, Michael, that we had in this election was we had 412 GPS ballot tracking devices. And that is an innovation in elections. Over the years, we've always been somewhat challenged with respect to making sure that every ballot gets back, every ballot box that's at the vote centers gets back to Election Central timely. And sometimes they just don't, and tracking them has been challenging at times. So we came up with an idea to actually put a GPS tracking device in every ballot box that we have that we send out to the vote centers. And it was really neat on election night to come up on a screen and we can actually see where every ballot box was in real time, whether it was coming back or if it was still at a vote center. An incredible technology that was deployed that, again, goes to the safety and security and the custody of each ballot. A really big area in this election, of course, was the number of election staff and volunteers. All in all, we had 1,300, more or less, both volunteers and employees. This gives you the overview of the actual breakdown amongst volunteers and employees, but it was quite an incredible task to accomplish, to logistically bring all of these people together, to train them and have them ready to go during the 29-day period of the election. And again, my hats off to our team for putting together a recruitment effort, both with our HR, to bring on not only employees, but also a large number of volunteers into the election, which, by the way, a lot of other election offices were having a real rough time getting volunteers into their and employees into their systems to manage the election. We were very fortunate here in San Mateo County. Okay. Key to that success was our student democracy program. We deployed, about 614 students in this election, and they were essential. All those folks that you saw at the curbside service and at the vote centers were basically part of our student volunteer program. We also had vote center volunteers that were non-students that also helped in the process. And again, we were fortunate to have over 1,000 applicants for those vote center volunteers. Okay, Mike. One of the biggest challenges that elections officials faced, of course, was the COVID-19 environment. Thanks to Mr. Church, we were able to obtain over $150,000 that we invested, and they're still in our election facilities for COVID-19 health and safety. Plexiglass shields to separate the voters. We had voting equipment, it was disinfected, social distancing is required in all of our facilities. And, of course, it's monitored, and we have masks, gloves, and face shields provided to all vote center staff. I think one remarkable statistic is that out of 33,000 users of our vote centers and 1,300 volunteers and employees together, not one case of COVID emanated from our facilities. So we were very, very, not only fortunate, but it was really by design that we had such a safe environment that not one case of COVID came out of those facilities. Election statistics is just an overview. This was the largest election ever held in the county, and that gives you a little. The vote patterns are interesting to look at. Vote by mail ballots. We received 345,000. That was 91% of the ballots that were cast were by mail, and we had vote center ballots. We had 32,000. That number went up to about 33. So these are kind of a little dated because we did increase the vote center ballot numbers a little bit. And again, VBM returned before election day. That was big, and the reason it was because of AB 860 that allowed us to start processing ballots 29 days before the election, where before we basically had to wait 15 to 10 days before we can actually start processing those ballots. We were able to start earlier, and because of the large communication that we had with our voting public to vote early, don't delay, the results are right there in the number of returned ballots before election day. Almost 90% of those ballots were returned before election day. That is really, really impressive. Let's see, turnout, historic highs, is that we mentioned before, this was, almost 86%. And you have to go back 50 years, over 50 years to get numbers like that. The highest election percentage ever in the history of San Mateo County went back to 1960, and that was the Nixon-Kennedy presidential election. Okay, Mike? This just gives you a real quick overview of the vote centers and in-person turnout comparisons. Just go far to the right, and you take a look at traditionally, everybody waited till the last day to come to the vote centers and cast the ballot. So you can see the ratio between the last day and all of the preceding days leading to election day. It was minimal in terms of the usage of vote centers during a traditional election. In this election, because of our campaign to get voters to vote early, you can see that the voting was spread out throughout the whole 29-day early voting period, with very little utilization on election day of vote centers because it was spread out throughout the whole election. Very impressed, and staff here has said, it felt throughout the whole 29-day period that it felt like election day. We had lines, but they were short, but still, nevertheless, we had lines, starting the first day of the early voting period that were maybe 10 deep. And it really felt like election day for 29 days. And it really had a tremendous positive impact on the last day that was manageable with only 11,000 folks showing at the vote center. Okay, Mike. One of the innovative concepts that we used this year was a mobile vote center. We took voting to the people, and our mobile vote center went throughout San Mateo County. As you can see, we had the Ceremony Center, Half Moon Bay Airport, the Cow Palace, Pescadero High School, and Hillsdale Mall. It was a very, very popular service, and you can anticipate that we will do that again in the future. But it was really important, particularly for those areas that are out of the urban zone and also in targeted communities. It was really amazing to see, people that were going, let's say, for example, that's at the Ceremony Shopping Center possibly, and that set up right there. And people would, be going shopping. They go, oh, great, I can actually, vote here, I can register. It really brought voting to the people, which was just a great service, and it was safe, as you can see, and it was highly utilized. Go ahead, Mike. And so here's some statistics, over the period of time that we utilized the vote centers. Okay, Mike. We were anticipating a very, very large turnout on election day. And so we established a super center at the San Mateo County Event Center. And you can see all of the, services that are provided below: curbside ballot drop-off, in-person voting, replacement ballot pickup. It was great. Now, most of the people never made it in there because they utilized the curbside ballot drop-off at the event center. But this was, again, a heavily utilized facility, but people never got in because they used the curbside ballot drop-off for the most part. Some people did utilize it, but when I was there, all of them were using the curbside ballot drop-off. And the drive-through at the event center. That's a kind of picture of how we set that up. A very important service that was provided in this election, again, due to AB 860, where remote accessible vote by mail was expanded to all voters. And as I mentioned, San Mateo County was the first county in the state to provide remote accessible vote by mail to visually impaired voters back in 2017, I think, was the first deployment of that system. It was now available to all voters. And as you can see, it was utilized pretty good. Normally, we only see 40, 30 users of this system in an election. 100 would have been a high number. But in this election, you can see that as of November 16th, we had 667. And I think all in all, it was close to 1,000 that actually used it. Okay. And of course, voter education and outreach. Key to the success of elections, particularly vote by mail elections, but I would say that this statement holds true for whether it's polling place or not, is voter education and outreach. But particularly when you are in a vote by mail environment, as you all very well know, it is essential to communicate with voters and educate them as to the opportunities that they have for a particular election. Can you go back 1 second, please? And, you know, our Voter Education and Outreach Committee, you know, the Voters' Choice Act requires that counties establish at least 2 statutory committees, which is the Voting Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Language Accessibility Advisory Committee. In San Mateo County, we established the VOC, which has really been instrumental in all of the programs that we have initiated and communicating those effectively to our constituents. And this is really the foundation of the success of vote by mail in San Mateo County, is the education of voters as to the ground rules and the systems and the opportunities and options that are available to everyone out there. This year, I think, you know, again, one of the most innovative and real practical approaches to voter education outreach is using trusted messengers. And we contracted with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, who did an absolutely great job along with Thrive and the VOC members to establish a community-based organization network for targeting those targeted communities to improve not only communication, but also voter participation and engagement in the elections process. We'll see with Mindy's report to a certain extent how effective that was in reaching out to those communities, but we were very effective in getting the word out there, that is for sure. And we'll talk more about Dr. Mindy Romero's report when it's provided shortly. Okay, Mike. Now, this is perhaps the worst PowerPoint slide that I could ever put together because it's hard to read and it was kind of put together at the last minute here, but there's a lot of data here. And, you know, in terms of the number of postcards that were sent out, the texts, the bookmarks, this kind of summarizes just in the paragraph headings there, all of the ground level efforts to communicate with our constituents and population. So we used every manner possible, from postcards to text to bookmarks, billboards, banners, buses, DMV, social media, and it goes on and on, targeted online ads, website ads, and it was effective. And, you know, the results that we have, the positive results that we've experienced is because of this type of communication. And the word got out very effectively to vote early, do not delay, and to a large extent, the large numbers and the efficiency of the election is the result of this voter education and outreach effort. So on that note, I will pass it back to Petra. If there's any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you. And thanks for adding those, the last couple of slides. Jim, would you be able to share the slide deck with us to send it out to this group?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I know there's some people who've already asked for it. So that would be great. We will send a follow-up email as well as the invitation to the other events soon. Does anybody have any questions for Jim? Besides, can we have the slides? So it's actually 10:28. So I think what we're going to do then is just say thank you guys, and definitely see you on St. Patrick's Day. Hope to see you on February 24th, and hope to see you guys all live soon too, because really.
Thank you,
Petra.
Good morning.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Oh.